Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and today we're talking to educator, singer, and author, Laurie Orth. I met Laurie through one of my recent graduates, and Laurie is the author of Rocket Recorder. Now, we're going to talk in this story a smidge about teaching techniques, but really what this conversation became was Laurie's story of how she, as a music educator and an opera singer, got interested in NASA and rockets and space, and then was able to use that as the puzzle piece to engage her middle schoolers in new ways in music. And what you're going to hear in this story, Laurie is super passionate about STEAM, and the advocacy heart that she has is just palpable. I really hope that when you listen to this story, you hear how she has overcome no's, how she has learned new things. I mean, she's going to throw out a lot of information about rockets. It's really fun. And we talk about her big dreams and her big goals. And so really, it's about getting it together and just doing it, even if it scares you. She had this great thing. She's like, sometimes I get a little scared to make a phone call, but then I realize the person on the other end is also an adult. So grow up and be a grown up and make the phone call. Like, how many times have you thought, oh, I don't know if I want to make this phone call? I just really enjoyed hearing Laurie's story. Now, as promised at the end, Laurie will come back on the podcast and share some of her awesome teaching tips. But this episode, this one is about science and space and taking your dreams beyond what you could even imagine by hearing Laurie's story that is music education intersecting with an interest in aerospace. This episode is brought to you by all of our patrons over at patreon.com/musicedmatters. Jump over and see ways that you can support the podcast. Of course, like and review so more people can hear, but without further ado, let's hear Laurie Orth's story and how she wrote Rocket Recorder. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are talking to Laurie Orth. Hello, Laurie.
Hey, how are you?
I'm so thrilled this is happening. Listeners, I found Laurie's contact because of one of my recent music ed grads, Corey. He has been so excited for me to talk to you because of your work with recorders. But we have to introduce you to the listeners with the brand new warm-up questions. Oh, what's your name?
Laurie Orth.
And where do you live?
I am in Evans, Georgia, which is a suburb of Augusta.
Which is right across the water from Aiken.
That's right. Yeah.
And what is it that you do, Laurie?
Wow. Do you want the long or the short version?
Whatever you want to give us. That's the best part.
Okay. I am a music teacher, and I like to say that I am a gig worker. I've got 4 hats that I wear. One is music educator, and right now I am an independent contractor with the Jesse Norman School of the Arts, and they're located in Augusta, and they have put me at a school this year, and that school is called Challenge Prep Academy, and they are in Augusta, and I absolutely love my job there. I work 1 day a week at Challenge Prep, and I teach elementary and middle school students. And then my second hat that I wear, I work at St. John United Methodist Church. I am the new junior choir director, and we just started back with our children's choirs, and I'm excited about that. I had 8 weeks with them before Christmas, and then we're starting up tomorrow, and we'll go through April. I'm excited, have 10 students. And then I'm also the soprano section leader at St. John United Methodist in downtown Augusta. So that's hat number 2. Hat number 3 is I am a book author of my book, Rocket Recorder, which we can talk about in a little bit. And I work marketing that. And that is a huge, huge hat. All sorts of things that fall under that: social media, learning social media, writing articles, doing professional development, applying to present at conferences, presenting at conferences, all sorts of things like that. And then I'm involved in a lot of service organizations. So I have a huge part of my life that's involved in that. And do you want me to tell you what they are, or
Of
do we keep
course.
going?
Yeah, keep telling
Okay.
us.
My first service organization that I listed is the Girl Scouts. I started volunteering for the Girl Scouts in November of 2020, which was a weird time to be doing that. But they had we had scheduled it pre-pandemic, and so they kept it on their list, and they put it out there. And I taught at a local Girl Scout camp called Camp Tanglewood, and I did some workshops about women in aerospace and my space themed music. And so then they invited me back for 2 summers. And so I did the same type of thing. The first summer, they also added a music workshop where I could help the girls get ready for their earning of their music badges. And of
That's so
course,
fun.
all the music, it's a long list. It's like, this is really serious stuff that they could potentially do to earn their music badge. But all the music excerpts were space themed. I was like, we're going to listen to Jupiter from the planets. And when they had to listen to opera, I was like, we're going to pick an aria from Rusalka. Here's Song to the Moon. And it's kind of like The Little Mermaid. So yeah, I was that guy. But what was so cool about that job, they have camp names. And so my point of contact said, what's your camp name going to be? And I was like, I don't know. People call me Mrs. Orth. And they're like, no, they're not going to, your students are not going to call you Mrs. Orth at camp. And I said, okay, what about Rocket? And so these little girls, because we're in the South, they added Miss. And so I was Miss Rocket, Miss Rocket. Thank you so much for teaching us, Miss Rocket. It was
so cool.
I loved it. So then I went back this past summer and I got to be Miss Rocket again. Okay, so that's one service organization. And then another one is I work with the Air and Space Forces Association. And that used to be called the Air Force Association. But when the Space Force came into being, they lengthened the name. But we still go by the initials AFA. And you'll love this. I am the chapter president of the Savannah AFA.
How were you the
I know.
chapter president of the Savannah AFA in Augusta?
Because our chapter is huge and it covers Savannah, Augusta, Statesboro, Brunswick, like the whole
Oh, it's just
that
like
whole
the whole
side of
South Georgia.
Georgia. South and central. And yeah.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
and I got that by accident. Um,
How did that
our
We're going to
chapter,
have to go backwards in just a second and
you
figure out how you got obsessed with space, but finish telling us how you accidentally became president of this big ol' AFA organization.
okay. Um, AFA is a big STEM education sponsor. And I was helping out at my son's high school with a STEM program called the Cyber Patriot program. And Cyber Patriot is about cyber defense. And it was the coolest thing. And I was the team assistant, which was like the team mom. And I did all the administrivia for the coaches who were volunteers. They didn't have children in the program. I did. And so I wanted to ease their burden as much as I could. So I did all of the parent wrangling and kid wrangling and food and everything that had to happen for 4 years. And the AFA sponsored that program, and I really didn't know much about them. I didn't know anything about them. And I was apparently in the Savannah AFA, but the Savannah AFA was kind of an inactive chapter. And so in December of 2019, I got an email from the new Savannah AFA president. And he said, hey, we're rebuilding the chapter. Would you like to be involved? And I replied back and I said, sure. Here's what I've done with AFA. And I said, I was the team assistant for this program. And he said, great. How would you like to be vice president of aerospace education? And I said, oh, I'm a music teacher. I don't think you heard me correctly. I can't do that. And he said, yes, you can. You're it. So I started doing vice president of aerospace education, which meant I administered the STEM Teacher of the Year program for Savannah AFA. And I did that for 2 years. And then my president had to step away and couldn't continue with his volunteer position. And I was kind of like the last man standing. And so I became president without working my way up. So I'm still learning the organization. And that's how I got it. And I'm working to rebuild my chapter. It's slow going. But I've gone to Washington, D.C. to go to 2 national conferences. I have talked to generals, retired generals, about space and music things. And it's blown my mind what I have learned and done and people I've met through AFA. So I'm grateful that it has come into my life. I love the work I do. I love supporting STEM teachers. And that's just one of them. I can keep going. I've got other
Hold on,
service
wait. I
organizations.
have got to ask some questions here. We're going to pause. Okay,
Okay.
question number 1. Did you get into space because your son was into space and aerospace and all of that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that's where it
You want to
started.
hear, you want to hear that story?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I have 2 boys. They're young men. I shouldn't call, they're not even young men. They're grown-ups. 21 and
Grown-ups.
25. I know.
Is
I
that what
know.
we are?
Yeah. Well, to call them young men, yeah, like you could call a 12-year-old young man, I'm like, they're not, they're big people. So my oldest son went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, and he studied mechanical engineering his freshman year. And then over the summer, he wanted to switch majors, and he picked this new thing that they had, and it was called commercial space operations. And I was like, what is that? What? NASA? And I had known about NASA. I mean, everybody knows about NASA, but I was not really into it. And in fact, we used to live in Jacksonville, Florida, and we were there during the last space shuttle launch. And my husband was like, hey, let's get in the car and go down and watch it. And I'm like, it is so hot. I don't want to do that. You'll have to wait forever outside by the side of the road. Are you kidding me? I didn't go and I missed it. I missed seeing the last shuttle launch. That's where I was. And then fast forward, and now my son is switching his major to do this commercial space thing. And I didn't understand the commercial part of it. So there's NASA, and then there's commercial companies that make things. And now there's SpaceX and United Launch Alliance and Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic and a bazillion space companies. And so his degree program was preparing him to go work in the commercial space sector. And it was not an engineering program, it was all the mission control things, human factors, orbital mechanics, safety. It was a whole bunch of stuff like that. So I was interested. And I went to the NASA website and I started looking at things on the NASA website. And I would ask him about, what are you learning? And he would tell me. And I was so intrigued. And I started watching commercial launches and watching them on YouTube and things like that. And I became this big space nerd. I was like, hey, it's a community. I'm part of the tribe, man. It's awesome. And so that was just a thing that was going on. And I was teaching music. I had a homeschool business before I started working for the Jesse Norman School. I had my own business teaching homeschoolers. And I had that business for about 6.5 years. And homeschool mothers outsourced their music education needs to me. And I worked at 2 different churches. And one year I worked in my house. And I had all my students come to my house. It's wild. It was like 17 kids in one class. Ding dong. Hi, Mrs. Orth, we're here. It was crazy. But I taught homeschool. And so my last year doing that, I had a group of middle school students and we were learning recorder, and they had not had a structured music program. They hadn't had me for years and years. And so I thought they need to learn the recorder. We're going to learn recorder. And we were doing recorder basics. And then we did like a recorder method book, which was all nursery rhymes. And I'd used it before for little children and it worked. But all of a sudden I had these kids that were 10, 11, 12, 13, and they're like, we don't want to do hot cross buns. What the heck is this? So that's when the space came into class. One day they were talking about Star Wars and they wouldn't be quiet. And I was just searching for anything to sort of like calm them down and rein them in. And I said, who wants to learn about reusable rockets? Who wants to learn about SpaceX reusable rockets? And they were like, what is she talking about? And I said, there's this company called SpaceX, and they have reusable rockets, and the rocket goes up into the air and then it comes back down and they reuse it. Instead of, in the old days, in the Apollo program, the rockets would go up and then they would fall back down piece by piece into the ocean, never to be used again. And these kids were like, oh, that's so wasteful. What about recycling? Why didn't they recycle? And that was how it started. And so I thought, I'm seeing this light bulb moment of my students getting so engaged talking about rockets. So we transitioned to the recorder music, which wasn't enlightening, and no light bulbs were going off. And at the end of that day, I'm driving home and I thought, how can I fix this? How can I get that engagement? Maybe I could buy some music about rockets or space or something. So I started looking and I couldn't find any. And I went to the NASA website, and they have this huge STEM website that has everything about anything space related and very little about space and music. They have a tiny bit. They have a space musical, which is fantastic, but it was too hard and it wasn't recorder music friendly. And so I thought, well, I'll just write something. I'll just write them some music.
Had you written
And
before?
so I wrote no, but I went to music school.
Okay.
I went to, I wrote a 16 measure piece of recorder music, and I thought, what's a catchy title? Grid fins. Let's call it grid fins. And those are steering mechanisms on the Falcon 9 rocket. They come out and they help it guide itself back down. And I got some pictures of grid fins, and my sister, who's also a music educator, her name's Lisa Hasselbeck. She teaches music ed in New York near Buffalo, and she's a fantastic teacher, and she's a wonderful mentor of mine. She's a jazz pianist. She can listen to anything and write anything. She did all the theory classes and all the arranging. I didn't. I did all the opera performing classes and acting, which didn't help me when I needed to write all this stuff. So she helped me tremendously. And I said, can you write me an accompaniment for this? And she's like, sure. And she does it like while she's sitting watching TV, and she has an app where she can click in the chords and make a chord chart. And she's like, here. And she sent it to me through a voice memo, and I brought it into class. So we had a picture of the grid fins, we had the voice memo of the accompaniment, and I had my 16 measures of B, A, G, and C, which is all the notes that they knew. And the reason why I thought I could write it was because they only knew 4 notes.
Yeah, you had 4
And I
notes
was
to
like,
work
this
with.
is not going to
We
be,
can do that.
it's not rocket science. I can do it. And so that's how it started. And it was the best recorder class ever. These kids were so engaged. They looked at the picture. We got to talk a little bit about SpaceX. And then we transitioned to the music. And I said, let's look at this. Let's look at the sheet music. What do you see here? Okay, is there a repeat sign? How many measures? What's going on? Any tricky places? All right, let's play it. And they were with me 100% of that lesson. And at the end of it, one of my students, a 10-year-old, said, what are you going to write for us next week, Mrs. Orth?
Oh, and no pressure.
And I was like, I don't know, because it kind of took a while to do all that. But I started writing music every week, and I just like kept doing it and kept doing it. And it was such a fun expression of my love. And I got to talk to my son about stuff, and he helped me with some words to songs. We eventually started writing songs. And so that started it. And my students became these little space fans. And they did things like 2 boys their parents bought them a Saturn V rocket, a Legos Saturn V rocket,
Cool.
and they brought it to class in their mom's minivan. I had kids that were going to Houston anyway for a trip to see family, and they said, can you take us to NASA? So they asked their
They got
parents. I mean,
hooked.
they were homeschoolers. They asked their parents, will you take us to NASA? So they went to Johnson Space Center, and they toured the neutral buoyancy lab, and their tour guide was asking them all these questions, and they knew the answers. And this tour guide was like, "How come you kids know so much about space?" And they said, "We learned it in our music class."
Oh, that's so good. It's so cool.
And I was like, this is working. And we talked about space exploration. We talked about going to Mars. And once one boy said, "We just need a portal, Mrs. Orth. We just need a portal to get to Mars." So that made it into the lyrics of one of the songs. So anyway, that's how
What
it
a cool
started.
origin story. And so
It was
how long did it take you to take all those little individual songs you wrote for that one class and turn it into a book?
um, well, I started writing, let's say January of that year, and we only went through March. Okay, January, February, March, all this stuff was happening, and I was writing all this stuff. And then because we live in Augusta and the Masters program or the Masters golf tournament happens, everything kind of shuts down and we don't go on after. So homeschool's the same way. They're like, we don't do anything in May. So, and April. So I kind of sat on it. So school was done for me and I sat on it. And then I thought, I want to write this into a book. I really wanted it to go on the NASA website because it hadn't been there. That's why I wrote it, because I couldn't find it. And I thought, "Oh, of course they're going to want what I wrote." So I called them up. I called NASA headquarters.
Wait, you
Hello.
just up and called NASA? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's
I
so
was like,
cool.
how do I do this? I was nervous and I was pacing and I'm like, she's just, whoever's answering, they're just an adult. It's okay. You're a grown up. Get yourself together. You can make this phone call. So after pacing, and I'm like, okay. So I call up and I talk to the person in the STEM department. And I said who I was and that I'd just written all this music for Recorder that was space themed. And I'd like to do a partnership with NASA. And I did not know what that meant. There is such a thing called a partnership with NASA. And so they sent me paperwork and they're like, let's get this party started. Let's get going. They were interested. And I hadn't published anything. And so they realized that fairly quickly and they put the brakes on it and they said very kindly, "Oh, you have to pilot this. You have to publish this. You have to pilot this at the local, state, and regional level. And then you can get back to us. Good luck to you." And that was fairly heart-wrenching, but that lit a fire under me to publish. And so the first thing I did was publish. And it took me a year because I do so many other things. But I published my book. So in May of 2019, I had my book and I started to market it and went to a bunch of conferences. And then the pandemic happened. And so nobody wanted to teach Recorder. Nobody could teach Recorder. Nobody could sing. And I was on sabbatical. I put myself on sabbatical to do the book and I just stayed on sabbatical. And I did as much as I could to get the word out to all these teachers who weren't teaching Recorder. But I did. I emailed people. I had this mantra of how far can I get with an email? And in one of my conferences, I met a woman from Nigeria, and she was starting up a STEAM program in Lagos, Nigeria. And she said, "Would you be on one of our STEAM, or well, she called it a STEM webinar?" And I said, "Sure." So in June of 2020, right after the pandemic started, I hardly knew how to Zoom. I mean, think about that. Remember when we were
Yeah,
learning how to Zoom? I did a Zoom webinar in Nigeria
that's so
from
cool.
this,
With your
from this.
recorders.
Well, it was about my book. Yeah. I
Okay.
was teaching educators how to use my book in Nigeria. Um,
That's so cool.
I did webinars with Georgia Tech for they have a STEAM leadership conference. And that was my very first Zoom. And it was like, what's the chat? Wait, how do I do this? Yeah, a long time ago. So I've done just a lot of webinars, and now I'm back to teaching. So I'm teaching it in schools and summer camps and stuff like that.
So you're checking the list. Is your hope to eventually come back and loop back to NASA?
Yes, my path has crossed with them, and there are NASA STEM administrator type people that they're professors, doctors of whatever it is, science that they studied, and they do programs and they go to schools and they do that kind of stuff. So I've met two of those, and I've applied and I presented at a NASA conference for educators, and it was a webinar, and I had not gone to the in-person version. I've only done the webinar, but I did get to partner with a NASA STEM person for that. And so that was really cool. And as a good music student and a performer, I did a dress rehearsal for that because I was kind of freaked out. It
Yeah.
was such a big deal. This was February of 2021. And I did a dress rehearsal and I invited 140 people. And I thought somebody might show up
rehearsal.
to a Zoom dress rehearsal. I was like, I have to practice this on Zoom before I do the real deal. And so I invited 140 people and only 15 people showed up, which is brilliant. I was so grateful. And one of them was one of my AFA chapter members. I was so grateful he was there. I found out that he is a retired 2-star general, and no pressure. I found out that he used to run the Eastern Range at Cape Canaveral. Like, he was the commander of the Eastern Range where all the rockets go. He was on this call with me and I was like, oh my gosh. And then wait, one of the NASA STEM people was on there, Dr. Lester Morales.
For
And
your
I was
dress rehearsal. That's so
for my
cool.
dress rehearsal. And I had never met him, but we talked and I was like, and I thought, get it together, girl. And I had friends from high school who were on the call and they were like listening, and it just even makes me nervous to think about that. But it was so good. It was such a good rehearsal. And that's the music teacher, like practice, 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 practice. So yeah.
I love how it's all intertwined. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just right up front, this is such a cool story of just, I heard about space, so I'm going to go research it. And now look, it's like my career path moving forward. Like, you weren't afraid to learn
Mm-hmm.
something new and to make something new. You couldn't find the resource you wanted, so you just made it and you got a roadblock, but you're still trucking through. And I think that in and of itself sometimes is just really rewarding to hear someone else pursuing something.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm one of these people that I don't realize it until I have some time to look back. Like the homeschool gig. When I did that, I didn't plan that. I was looking for a part-time music teaching job and I couldn't find one. And a friend said, well, have you tapped into the homeschool community? And I was like, what's that? And I met a homeschool mom and she's like, hey, we've got this co-op. Why don't you talk to the head of the co-op? Okay. So like, I didn't plan it. It just happened. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, so I need to open up a business bank account. And then all of a sudden I had a website and I was doing tuition and, it just happened. So now I'm doing that again with learning how to write a book. I thought I could do it myself. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I got a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
I self-published through a company called Book Logics, and they do, you pick and choose what you need of their services. And I own all my intellectual property.
That's awesome.
But I don't have like a big fancy name behind me who's promoting me, but I own my intellectual property.
Yeah.
But I had to learn how to do all that. And I created a demo album for Rocket Recorder.
Cool. How did you do that?
I was thinking, that's what recorder books have. They have this like, either a digital download or a CD so music teachers can use it. And so it's user friendly. So I called up a local recording studio and I was like, hi, I'm a music teacher and I just wrote this book about recorder and I need to record every piece. And so this person on the other end was very helpful. And he's like, let's book a session. And I thought, oh, no, I'm not ready to book a recording session. I'm just inquiring. And he's like, no, what's good? And so he was persistent. And I thought, okay, get it together. We'll go do this. And I went downtown to this recording studio and the engineer was wonderful. And he is a rap singer and recording artist. And he didn't know anything about space. He does now. It was the most exciting thing to go into a recording studio. It was like performing, but for unknown audiences. Like, who's going to see this? People are going to listen to this for years. It better be good. And it was like, the headphones and okay, check, mic, check. And all right, let's lay that track down. All right, let's go back and do some background vocals. Okay, let's do that one more time. Let me check the levels. And we just did that for like, it was so intense for like 3 hours, 4 hours. And then we were almost done. And I thought, we got to come back for another one. And we did it again. And I got all my content recorded, plain recorder. And then there's some vocals, there's some songs. And so we did those.
So cool.
We did those. And yeah, so like I learned how to do that.
But okay, Laurie, there are some really big life nuggets here. One, make the phone call. The person on the other end is a grown-up and you're a grown-up, so just make the phone call. Two, send the email. You never know where you're going to get from that one email. And three, just because you don't know how to do it doesn't mean you don't know how to do it yet. It's just you're about to learn it.
I have learned so much from YouTube tutorials. I have, even my son, we have this thing about hashtag YouTube tutorials, because you can learn anything from YouTube. And I don't want to come across as like, oh, I never struggle, or I never have doubts, or the imposter syndrome. Yeah, I do. I work to fight it. And that fight has gotten shorter. I've had lots of no's, and they sometimes are gutting. They're absolutely gut wrenching. But then I learn from them. And if you want, I'll tell you about the most recent one, which was a really big one. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I have a dream. It's going to happen. Working on it. And it is to have a 3D printed recorder printed on the International Space Station and have an astronaut play it, all in the name of STEAM and music education. Because astronauts read children's books. I don't know if you know this, but there's a program, Storytime in Space, and they'll send a children's book to space, and the astronaut will read it, and they'll videotape it, and then they'll put that videotape on. Kids can go look up all sorts of books and have an astronaut read them a book before bedtime. And I just think that's so cool. And I'm like, if they can read a children's book, they can read music, they can read my book, they can read Rocket Recorder, and they can play a recorder. And what will that do for music education? Why not? That's my dream.
Piece. Whoa.
Right? So I was just thinking regular recorder, but one of my colleagues said, oh no, Laurie, it needs to be a 3D printed recorder. It will be so much cooler. And I thought, oh, that's so much trouble. Why? And no, it has to be 3D printed. Well, in fact, this friend of mine, Samantha Thorstensen, she works at the ISS National Labs education piece called CASES. And they have a partnership with a company that has a 3D printer on the ISS. And the company used to be called Made in Space, and they got purchased by a company called Redwire. And so there's a 3D printer on the ISS. And she's like, Laurie, this can happen. And I just was so like, it kind of freaked me out. Like, okay, tell me more. And she said, well, you have to submit a proposal. Well, again, I didn't know really what that meant, but I said, okay. I said, can I do it? I'm just a music teacher in Georgia. I am not an institution. I'm not a college. I don't have big bucks behind me. And she said, yeah, you could do it yourself. Okay. So I printed off the 2-part instructions on how to do this mystery proposal thing. And I only printed the first part. And it was a summary. It's how to write a summary proposal. And I thought, if that gets through, if I make it through the gateway, then I'll worry about the second part later. And that first summary part was hard. And a friend of mine said, Laurie, you need to learn project management. I'm like, why? She said, this is a huge project. You need to learn grant writing. And I said, why? And she said, because this is what you're doing. You're going to be writing a grant. I said, I am? I don't mean to be like a dummy. I just was like, my life is, let's skip around with little children, like I'm not in academia. I'm an elementary, middle school music educator, independent, by the way, not in a public school system. So all of this was like absolutely new to me. And so I wrote the summary and I submitted it, and it was hard. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and I got an email, and they said, "Congratulations, you have been invited to submit a full proposal." And
Oh.
so I was like kind of crying, and I was, shaking. And I said to my husband, it just got real. I have to learn how to do this. And so I bought a book on how to write on how to write a grant. And I read a book on how to write a proposal. And I did. And it was hard. And part of me in the back of my mind was like, the first time you do something is never your best effort. You need to do something multiple times. It's a whole practice thing that we get as musicians. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going to swing the bat really hard. This is my chance. This is my moment. And part of the second part of this is you get to work with an implementation partner. This was with the ISS National Laboratory. And they hook you up with an implementation partner who will take your experiment to space.
Oh.
Exactly. And I was like, this is really awesome. And I have to get it together. And so I got to.
We're going to have to make that one of our quotes too. Get it together. That's a great, just get it together. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm going to have to figure this out. So I had Zoom calls with an implementation partner to talk about my proposal, to help me with it. I learned all these new terms like up massing and down massing. And that up massing is sending things to space, and down massing is sending things back from the ISS. And, manifest, and you're going to have to get a place in the cargo manifest for your book, for your recorder. We'll have to send up 2 recorders. We'll send up a 3D printed, a terrestrial 3D printed recorder. I know. And I was like, this is so freaking cool. And then we'll send up the code to print a portion of a recorder, because we don't know if the 3D printer can print cylindrically in 0 gravity. We're going to hope so, but it could possibly go belly up. And this way there'll be a terrestrial 3D printer recorder in case it doesn't work. So then, we're going to have to talk about.
Terrestrial. Can we just talk about a terrestrial recorder?
Can you talk about how cool this whole thing is? That we're going to have to send it to NASA. They're going to have to look at our plans. They're going to have to clean it and make it completely, like, get all the germs off of it and put it in a sealed container because it's going to go in the astronaut's mouth. Blah, blah, blah. It was like so amazing. And I had to talk myself into getting ready for this to happen. Like, this could happen. And when you have a research thing on a cargo, like it goes on a SpaceX commercial, a SpaceX Crew Dragon, not Crew Dragon, a SpaceX commercial resupply Dragon capsule. Okay. They put supplies, they put scientific experiments, they put all that stuff in there, and they send it to space. Well, if you're one of the STEM research people, they talk about your research. Well, on this particular launch, we've got
a recorder.
A recorder. Like, I was visualizing this, like, this is going to happen. What's it going to feel like to stand there on really close, like 5 miles away, and watch my stuff, watch my book go up to the ISS? It was blowing my mind. And yet I was trying to, like, I visualize, I'm a big visualizer person. And I was like, I'm really close. And then my implementation partner, project manager, said, "Oh, Laurie, by the way, you need to know that your book probably won't get downmasked for a while. It's probably going to have to stay on the ISS for a year or longer because it's not top priority. Things like all the biomedical research needs to come back first. So I just need to make you aware of that." And
That's cool.
I was like,
That's
it's okay
really
with
cool.
me. I was just thinking, okay, I'm going to be at music educator conferences talking about this, and I'm going to be able to say, Rocket Recorder, the book is still on the ISS. It's still going around. Like yeah.
It's
I was
currently
having,
orbiting.
can you imagine what kind of a platform that would be for music
So
educators?
cool.
I know, it's so cool. Anyway, so long story short, I did not get funded. I submitted I
Oh
submitted all of this, and it felt worse than after the summary, because the summary was a big deal, and then I had to like learn all this other stuff, and I had all these meetings, and it was like sounding real, like it's going to happen.
no. And then it
and
doesn't.
and it doesn't. The research announcement was asking for STEM research, and I said, this is STEAM research. This is including the arts. And the people that are the judges, the adjudicators, they're looking for STEM. And I'm pressing hard. And STEAM, to a lot of people, they think it's art only. And I'm like, no, it's all the arts. You can learn so much from singing a song about something. Or what if you did a theatrical performance? You can still learn about something. So I'm working on that, like the tip of the spear in that way. But anyway, so I got the sad email, and I was kind of
But
gutted.
look at all the steps that you took towards it in the first place, and all the people that now know about
I know.
recorder and rocket recorders, and you can't
Yeah.
give up. Get it
So
together, Laurie. Get it
I know, I
together.
know. I have to tell you, the good thing that happened the day that I got the bad news. I mean, I was so grateful. I had been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And I was like, am I doing this or not? Because again, I'm thinking the whole get it together. If this goes, there's so much that has to happen, because
Right.
you have to like be able to get the word out, and how you're going to talk to underserved communities, and how you're going to do this on a national level. And I was like, okay, I got to get that piece together. Well, um, the morning that I heard back from the International Space Station National Laboratory, that morning, I heard back from somebody who I was reaching out to in an email in order to have some of the next steps in play. And I was reaching out to Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield and his people. And I was chatting with his chief of staff, and she wrote me back. And when I first reached out to them, they said, he's too busy. Thanks so much. Good luck to you. And I was like, okay, whatever. That day, she wrote me back unsolicited to say, if you get funded, we will find 20 minutes in Chris's schedule for you to have an interview with him. And he's really famous. He's a huge musician. He's got his own CD that he made on the ISS. Amazing, amazing. And he's an author. He's written a wonderful bestseller, which I've read and love. So when I got this unsolicited email back from him and his chief of staff, Cheryl Ann, I was like, oh, Cheryl Ann, oh my gosh, I was so excited. I was so excited. So that was a beautiful look what I don't want to say look what I've done, but look at what the steps,
Yeah,
it's all coming
you did
together.
all of that and it didn't happen, but
Yeah.
still there was some positive in there.
And then in the afternoon, after I went to school and I taught, I was sitting in my car after teaching, and I got this email, and I was just like, oh,
But I
I
believe
was
that you're not going
gutted.
to give up. You are not one of those giver uppers.
Yeah, I'm not. And what I told myself, this is the delightfulness about having really cool music educator friends who go on and pivot in their careers. One of my well, she's she's a virtual friend, like you are, Jen Rafferty. If you haven't talked to Jen Rafferty, you need to talk to her. She gave me a private coaching about dealing with, she does a lot of self-care for educators and refinding your why. It's so timely right now. She gave me a private coaching, and she said, Laurie, you need to um, don't bypass that feeling. Because I was just like, oh, forget it, I won't think about it. She's like, no, you need to feel it. You need to feel this. You need to acknowledge it and process it. And if it takes a while to process this disappointment, you need to process it. And so I was so grateful for that advice. So I just let it sit there. And during that sitting there process, the weeks of feeling sad and like, the best part was I gave it my all. I swung hard, but it didn't come together. Then I started thinking about ways to fix it. How's it going to be better? And I need to have way more than myself. I need to reach out to universities. I need to reach out to the Space Foundation. I need to reach out to Georgia Space Grant Consortium, South Carolina Space Grant Consortium. What if I reached out to Kennedy Space Center? What if I reached out to Johnson Space Center? They could be my, here's how we're going to get this information out. Because I read through my comments once, I read through the judge's comments once, and then I put it aside, and they marked me down for that piece, which is, how are you going to get the word out? It wasn't strong enough for them. So I just need to meet more people. I had all the people to put these pieces together.
Yeah, the processing provided more pathways to create that product. That's so exciting. Oh, this is so fun. I feel like we have a rocket that's going down to launch, and it's like almost launched, but not yet. Like they've rescheduled the launch, and I can't wait to see what happens as you keep working on all the pieces.
I love that. They call that in space speak, the launch got scrubbed.
We got scrubbed. Right? Well, you know what?
I hadn't thought
you should
of it.
say that. You got scrubbed. That doesn't mean it's canceled.
Amen. Yes.
That does not mean it's canceled. Yeah. Oh, this is so fun. Anyway. Laurie, your story is so inspiring. I love listening to all the ways you've gone. I will make sure to include your website in the episode notes. So if listeners want to check out Rocket Recorder, if they want to get in touch with you for some professional development, but I want to get to these end of show wrap up questions because I feel like these are going to be really interesting. So what's the best or most recent book you've read? You mentioned the book by the Canadian astronaut, but I bet you have another one.
Okay, I'll tell you about that one too. It's The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. So good if you're a space fan. Even if you're not, that is a fantastic book. I loved it. I was right there. Oh, I loved it. The other book that I'm reading right now is called Sea Venture, and it's by the author Kieran Doherty. I hope I'm saying that right. And it's about the colonization of Jamestown. 1607, 1608, 1609. And the Sea Venture was one of 4 ships that set out to populate Jamestown in the early days, and it got shipwrecked. They had a hurricane, and it got blown off course. Who knew? And it went to Bermuda, and it stayed in Bermuda for like a year, and they had to live, and it was paradise for those people. I mean, okay, they had to make their own accommodations, but they had a lot of food. It was so full of bounty. And then they fixed their ships, and then they go to Jamestown, and Jamestown had just gone through the starving times, and it was terrible there. But I am so into history and ancestry, and I love learning about that. But it's also such a correlation to people that are going to be colonizing Mars. What's it like? You know, when we're getting ready to go to the moon to stay, what's that society going to be like? What are the rules going to be like? And when you read what they did, and it's amazing.
What a great connection. Oh my goodness. So okay. So Mars and Jamestown. I totally get it. Okay. Cool. Question number 2. What or who is mattering or inspiring you right now?
Teachers in general. You know, it's hard right now. I'm lucky. I'm at a private school and I teach 1 day a week. And so I'm not getting burned out. And I just had a big sabbatical. And so teachers that are in it, who have been in it, who have been through the ups and downs of the pandemic and all of that, I'm so amazed by teachers who still go above and beyond, and they do professional development to continue their love and share it with their students. And the people that I hang out with virtually are teachers who are doing these programs that I want to do, this professional development. And they're the ones that inspire me, who are just doing so many awesome things for their students.
I totally agree. Teachers are very inspiring, especially right now. All right. We've talked about AFA, but are there any other organizations, or we can put that as the organization that you want to illuminate, or an organization that matters to you right now?
Um, let's leave it at that. I had a long list. I do volunteer for other places, but yeah, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, and I really didn't even get to talk about music teachery activities, which
Well,
I
we'll have
wanted
to
to
bring
do.
you back and talk about all different types of things. This was a cool story of how you got into space and recorders. It's just so well. Let's wrap it up with the final question. What is
Okay.
the thing that matters? The one thing you really want to make sure the listener walks away from the episode with?
I always end my own I have a YouTube channel, and I have, some tutorials on there for a rocket recorder, and I end my tutorials with, "Remember, music matters, and so do you. See you next time." And so
Yay! You and I
I
have such
wanted
similar endings.
I
I love
know.
it.
I saw yours. I was like, "Oh my gosh." You can teach so much with music. Oh my you
Mhm.
can teach anything with music. And all of these aerospace conferences that I've gone to where they have people that are up there saying, "How are we gonna start the STEM pipeline with young people? How are we gonna start before high school?" And I'm like, "Music. How are we gonna reach middle school kids? Music. And how are we going to reach young children? Music."
Music.
I'm like, singing and dancing, music and movement about rockets. You kidding me?
Hmm.
I just it's such a great way to teach anything, but this in particular, and it demystifies STEM, and it gets kids excited about learning about space exploration, and, "Oh, we sang a song about that." I do wanna talk to you again. I've got, like, so many
Yeah,
things
we'll
about
totally have to do it again.
aerospace education. Like, I can teach kids about the way a rocket's manufactured. I teach 5-year-olds about rocket manufacturing, okay?
Okay,
I
we're
do.
gonna have to pick up with rocket manufacturing and
Mhm.
five-year-olds when you come back with more tutorials. Lori, this has been so fun. Thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, you are so welcome. My goodness, it was great to talk with you.
Have you ever thought how far you can get from one single email? I love that Lori shared all of the steps that she went through getting interested in space and space exploration, volunteering for a slew of things, including the Air and Space Forces Association, and how she's taken all of that to create rocket recorder, so that we can engage our students in new and memorable ways. I hope that you have enjoyed learning from Lori as much as I enjoyed chatting with her. Just like she says at the end of her things, we all know that music matters, but you know what? You really, really, really matter. We all know that music matters, especially rocket music recorder. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.